When you think about taking care of yourself, you might think of things like self-health management. Sleeping 8 hours a night, not stressing out too much, getting enough food, common sense. While that's important, that's not the focus of this module. Rather, the focus of this module is on something more 20% project specific. If you haven't caught on already, all of the letters in this module correspond to one of the letters in I+. So let's tackle the last letter that's relevant here, I. Maybe you've already experienced this, or maybe it's not even in your realm of possibility yet, but it is so easy to lose sight of your own tie to the project as you get more into it. Features get added, more people get involved, more stressors get in the way, your responsibilities change, objects make the project more complex, and before you know it, you're working on a project that your heart just isn't into anymore. How did you get into this position? It's only gonna get more complex and potentially difficult from here. So let's take a second to check in. If you're losing sight of your interest, it's worth stopping and considering whether there's another project that you want to start. Yes, you started a weekend project and invested some time, but it really wasn't that much, just one weekend out of the over 200 you will have in high school. Whereas once you get into these month-long projects, you're spending 4 times as much time and it's becoming a more serious time investment. So hold your horses and let's breathe. Whatever stage you are with the MVP at this point, I'm sure you've already realized that the stressors are starting to come in. Since you are the project, the week that you had too much homework or your family got sick and couldn't work meant that your project was also backlogged for a week. The stakes are higher. You're reaching out to news organizations, people are counting on you, and suddenly it's a lot scarier and less enjoyable. It's more work and not as much fun. That's to be expected. And while this 20% project and future ones are going to involve more work, much more so than the passion-filled weekend project, and you shouldn't let that deter you. You should consider whether that work is so uninteresting and admin-filled that it's not enjoyable at all anymore. If it starts to feel like something that drags you down rather than lights you up, alarm bells should be going off in your head. Hopefully you haven't run into this, but it's likely to happen to you at some point. I know because it happened to Kevin and I. After doing more research into creating a robot, which was my original 20% project, and doing the week-long project of creating an app, I felt this dread and apathy in my chest. Maybe dread is a harsh word, but I felt this mental block and didn't feel any emotion at all at the idea of starting the project. I lost sight of the reason I picked that project, largely because that interest didn't exist in the first place. Kevin experienced a similar dispassion with his art exhibit. We all bleed red, he told me after month 2 or 3, was starting to lose motivation, especially because no one was submitting art. As time goes on and progress slows down, it's really easy to get demotivated. If you are in a similar boat, don't worry, there's a couple options. Again, if you barely started, you can restart and pick a new MVP to do in the same field. Maybe it's just the medium through which you've done it. Perhaps you're fascinated by AI, but you don't want to build a robot to showcase what you've learned. You've always wanted to try an animation, so why not create a short YouTube video that teaches others about AI? You can also try an exercise to try to refine the spark and motivation behind picking this as a project in the first place. When I was feeling down during my restaurant planning, I'd often watch Gordon Ramsay Kitchen Nightmares videos to make me laugh and reignite the fire within me. It's so easy to get lost in the administrativia and planning stuff that you lose sight of the emotional aspect that got you to where you are now in the first place. This is really important. So important, in fact, that you should watch at least 10 minutes of inspirational content each week to remind you why you started the project in the first place. Was it because you wanted to help a certain group? Was it a love of a certain activity? A desire to learn about something new? Finally, if you've executed less than 25% of your project, it may be worth considering starting from scratch. This might hurt your pride, but don't think of it as giving up. Rather, think of it as changing direction. As I mentioned before, knowing what you don't like is just as important as knowing what you do like. Best to stop a few weeks into the project than in an existential crisis a few months in. While we don't recommend you do this multiple times, it is worth considering as a last resort if you genuinely feel stuck. But honestly, if you're feeling that way, shoot Kevin or I an email, and we'll schedule a time to call you and share our thoughts and opinions, likely in the form of a motivational speech. The work will increase from here, but so will the payoff. Sometimes that can be invigorating. Other times it can feel like too much. If that does happen and you're feeling down, take a moment to identify if that initial interest is still there. Because if it's not, it'll be really hard to get through those low points those late nights. Don't say it'll be fine and continue to charge without it. That's a recipe for disaster. It's alright to take a step back and take care of yourself. Constantly check in with how the product is doing and how your users are feeling, but also about how you're doing and how you're feeling.